So good morning and welcome to Delicious Art Class. Today we're going to be painting this cute little purple pansy. So if you have downloaded the video or logged on to do the class, then you should have these notes. So this is an A4 page of notes. And you can see on there that we have a colour version of the picture we're going to paint, a little bit of text and information about the class, and also a black and white version. So the first part of the class will be doing a charcoal sketch of the black and white version, and we'll talk you through that as we go. And then the second part of the class will be doing the colour version. So the charcoal part or the black and white part is usually only, we try to keep it to about 15 minutes. Sometimes I get carried away. And then we spend most of the time doing the colour one. So I will now flick my screen over to my desk so that you can start seeing what I'm painting. And please, if you have any questions, ask me, and I'll be able to stop the share and come back to the screen and we can answer any questions. So don't hesitate to do that. All right, so I'm just switching over to my screen now. This is on my iPad and it's actually looking down onto my table. As soon as I get it ready, there it goes. So that's a view of my table, and that's what you'll be looking at as we do this class. I'm just going to adjust the focus, make sure that that's nice and clear. It doesn't keep jumping around as we go. Move a few bits and bobs out of the way. Okay, so today we're going to be doing this pansy, and the first part of the class is drawing it in black and white. So normally to do that, I like to use charcoal, and that is a willow charcoal. So I have a little tin here of willow charcoal sticks. Most of them are broken because I've used them all. But what I like to have nearby is a thin piece like this that I can actually draw with and use the end, and then a wider, shorter piece that I can use for shading. So this part of the class is just a little exercise to get familiar with the picture, to study the tones. So by tones, I mean the different shades of grey within this picture, because the tone is what's very important when you do anything, whether it's in colour or black and white. You really need to understand the power of tone or value, as it's often referred to, and understand and see how it all works together, and why you need to have a very dark background like this to get a really bright white or glowing flower to pop out of the page, and vice versa. So it's a really good exercise to understand the difference between your darks and your lights and to see how they work. So the first thing we're going to do for this little exercise is grab your art diary or a bit of drawing paper, and we're just going to do a very small sketch of the picture. Now I've just drawn up a portrait rectangular shape. So today's painting is portrait. That means it's tall, not wide. And this is a rough shape about the same dimensions as what we're doing today. If you want to measure yours to get it perfect, then that's absolutely fine. But I like to sort of spend this part of the class being a little bit looser and a little bit freer. So once you've got your rectangle drawn up like that, pop in your grid lines. So on your colour version, you can see I've put some grid lines. That's a crosshair basically. I've got a line down the middle and a line across the centre. So what that does is help me break the picture up into 4 segments, and I can draw each segment at a time, and then when we're done, the whole thing should all be in the right place. So it just helps you get everything in perspective and in the right spot. So to do that, we're going to look firstly at the colour version just to get the drawing right and all these little segments sorted out. So let's start in the top left segment. We're not going to worry about the background at this point. All we're looking at is the flower and the shapes around that. So if you look in this top left-hand section here, this is the top left corner, you can see there's just a few very distinct lines or shapes in there. And that's what we're looking for. We're just looking for the outline of the flower petals, not all the detail and stuff yet. So this is the first bit. So if I look here, I want to find where the beginning of this petal sits in relation to my grid line. So I can see that it's about 1/3 of the way down on that grid line there in that quarter. So you could even cover up all the other bits and just look at that quarter. Let's do that, see if that makes it any easier. Cover up the other quarters and just study this top one here. And that will really just break everything down into a shape rather than a flower. So then you start to see things as shapes. And when you can do that, you could train your brain to do that. It just makes drawing something a whole lot easier. So I'm going to say that that top of that petal sits at about there. So it's about 1/3 of the way down on this quarter. And then it comes across, just do very light lines at this point. You don't want to go too heavy in case you need to undo it. So you could just do a very light line in that shape of that petal. It's got a little rise just there, and then it kind of comes down and it rounds down around the edge on the left. Notice how far it comes in from the side of your picture. So how much space do you need to have it coming in here and allow for through that area there, and bring it to there. So you can actually put a few little dots in some spots where you can see it intersecting, and then come around, and then we've got this little bit line that goes down to there. So that's basically the base shape of the outside petal there. And this area here where that intersects with the line on the bottom is at about halfway across in that section. So see how by mentally kind of breaking things down into parts and measuring and seeing how far away things are from each other, you really get a good idea of where all the shapes sit. Okay, so now we've got that base outline in. The next thing I want to look at is this little shape inside here. So inside there, we've got this funny little shape coming through there. And so let's do this outline of this one first. So it comes up about there and then across, and it doesn't come all the way over to our center line. So it comes down at about there. So let's draw it to about there. Just check your angles too. I had my angle a bit wrong right then. Your kneadable eraser is your best friend. So this is my grubby little piece. They come in a lovely lighter grey colour, and you can pull parts off. So it's kneadable, as in kneading dough. And then you can break it up into smaller sections, and you can knead it and reshape it. So these are wonderful erasers for taking charcoal off and also pastel. So that's a good little tool to have handy nearby. Okay, so see how I've just drawn that little shape there? That's that little petal that's sitting inside. And then we have this purple section. So you can see this purple area here. It sits about there. So that's darker. You can actually shade that if you want to, just so you know which part that is. And then on the other side over here, we have a line coming down to join on to the inside petal that we've just done. And then there's another little light greenish kind of area there, and that comes down and up. And then we've got a dark purple shape right in the middle there where the crosshairs are. So I've just darkened that off too with some charcoal, just to give it a darker tone. So can you see what I mean about drawing in all the lines? Now this does not look anything like a flower. When you look at that, you think, oh, I don't know what that is. It's just a bunch of lines. But that's often the best way to interpret something in sections. And then you can move over to the next bit and do that part. And as you work your way around the page, slowly it'll come together and start to make sense. So if we move over now to the right-hand top section, you can see how all of this is starting to join together. So I can figure out where the petal sits on the halfway line, and where it intersects is about there. So put a little spot in there. And then up here, we can continue that line around. So when the petal comes across on the top section, it dips down a little bit, and then it fans out again. So I've got this lovely fanning out section that comes around like that. And then we have this section that comes down. So that's the outline of that part. Looks a little bit like mouse ears or something. And then you can see this section here, this little shape in here is really interesting, isn't it? Now, we don't have to work out what that is or why that's there. Just draw it in. It's that easy. Just draw in what you can see. Don't stress about why it's there or anything else. That's that little shape down through there, that light purple shape. And then we can come down and we can continue this other petal which sits in front. So that again, that's another shape within the shape. And it comes around roughly like that. Okay, so now we've got all these lines in this section and we've got the dark purple or the dark shape within the petal coming through here. And so it's kind of all jagged around the edges, but it comes around through there and sits around there. So now we've got half of it drawn. All right, and as you can see, it's just line drawings at this stage. But as we move around and get it complete, then we'll start to do some shading. All right, so now let's look at the bottom quarter. And same scenario. You can see we've got this lovely white petal coming down through here. So we've literally got like a loop coming across and then down into the bottom. So figure out on your page whereabouts the bottom of that petal hits within the page on your grid line. Let's say it's about there. It's a little bit lower than halfway, just a tad. So if you figure out your halfway mark and then go slightly lower, that's where that petal will intersect with your grid line. So I know that one's there, and now I can draw this little petal, continue this one down the white edge of that, all the way down through here, and then out through there like that, something like that. It's a little bit off, but it's close enough. Okay, and then that petal continues across to the halfway line. So you can see there that the lines are quite simple as well. So we've got the outline of the white petals coming around and down into the bottom. That should come around a bit more like that. That's better. And then we've got this lovely purple section in the middle that continues down as well. So it comes down through here like that. And then the bottom petal also has a purple segment in the middle of it. And it comes down through like that, roughly like that. Okay. So now we've got that section drawn in. If you want to put in, notice on the bottom right of the picture, we've got a purple petal sitting there in that corner. You can choose whether you want to put that in or not. You can look at it, cover it up with your finger and think, I don't know whether the picture actually needs the distraction of that petal, or take it away and decide maybe it does, maybe that feels good for you. So you can make your own decisions about that kind of thing, and that's when it starts to become your art, because you're actually, you know, restructuring something to suit what you want to have in your art. So you could potentially now, let's do that anyway, draw this petal in down in this corner here. We can decide afterwards if we want to keep it there or not. Pop it in there and notice the shapes and where that comes in on your page, how high up on that page it starts and where it goes to and where it comes off on the bottom. So that's quite a dark area through there. All right, so let's continue around into the final quarter. So that's our bottom left-hand quarter. And now we can kind of join all the lines together and make sense of this. So if I go back up to my top line here and bring that little petal down through here, noticing again how far in from the side it is, so it doesn't get all the way out to the edge like this top petal. It sits further inside your picture. And then that kind of goes to about there. Then you can come down to the bottom petal that you started to draw in and continue that line through. It's got this beautiful little jagged edge on it. and that goes around through to there. So those two kind of join up, and then there's this top little fluster bit there. So this section, this part of the flower, has the center of the flower in it. So the flower is not centered in our picture, which is good because it's always nice to have something slightly off center. So what I'm going to do now is mark in this dark purple section because that's going to then bring everything together. So if we mark that in, down through here, and down through there, and up and around. So it's got this lovely rough edge around it. So that's kind of that shape there. And then you can continue this petal around through there. Okay. So basically, pansies have 5 petals. They have 2 large ones at the back, like we've got here, and they're overlapping. So you can see this darker purple section between the 2 top petals is where they're overlapping. That's actually shadow. So it's shadow of the left one behind the right one, or vice versa. No, I'm pretty sure that's the order of it. Okay, so it's got 2 petals there, and then it has this side petal on the right, so that's quite a big petal that we can see, and it's just because of the angle of the flower or the photo that's been taken. And then it's got this bottom petal that pops out in between the 2 middle ones. And then the other side petal sort of sits inside of here and comes up through there. And then it also has this beautiful dark purple kind of shape coming down through here. So that's that dark purple section in there. And that one comes out of there. And then in the middle, we've got this beautiful yellow glow, which is quite lovely. Okay, so when you break everything down into a shape, it just seems to all kind of come together. It might still look a little bit messy, but once we get a bit of shading in there, it'll start to make more sense. So we're just going to look at the stem of the flower now and have a bit of a look at that and see where that sits in relation to the grid lines and the edges and so forth. And I think it sits around about there-ish. So I'm going to draw that in there. Now you can see on the left of that there's another stem sitting behind it. Now that must be to another flower that we can't see. Now again, you've got artistic license. You can cover that up with your finger and decide, does that need to be there? Do I want to include it or not? I find it a little bit distracting, but it's up to you. If you feel like you want to put it in, then you can do that too. But it's not part of this particular flower that we're doing. It must be another one further away. And so that's when you kind of start to look at your background a little bit, figure out what's there and what you want to include or take out or leave in or whatever. So, you know, you've got a couple of options. You can leave out that petal, you can leave out that stem, and then it just becomes about that one pansy, and that becomes the feature of your picture. Or you can make it more into a scene if you want to add those, other elements in. So up to you to decide. In the meantime, let's grab our short, thicker piece of charcoal if you have one. I only just like the thicker ones because they're easier to hang on to, and I like to lie it down flat on my paper like that because I can get a lot more coverage with my pastel. And now we're going to look back at the black and white version because this is where we're going to find the tones. This is where you see the darkest and the lightest sections in this picture. So what we want to do now is start to shade in the background because it's quite dark. And I like the dark background because that means the flower, because the flower is light, it kind of pops on top of the dark background. So what we want to do is get your short, stumpy bit of charcoal and just rub it across your paper where you see dark, which is pretty much all over the background. There's a couple of variations of tone in a couple of places, but essentially the background is much darker than your flower. And so what we want to do is just use the side of the charcoal to push in some darks and get that nice and black through there. So especially up around the top of the picture, and then as you're coming down around the right hand side, you can see it's a slight change in tone just here on the right. It's a little bit lighter grey, and then we've got this interesting little dark shape that starts down through here. So that's leaves and branches and things in the background. It's all a little blurry. It's all a little bit of, you know, sort of vague shapes that we don't really need to give any detail to. But those shapes really do have an impact on, you know, your picture. And it's always lovely to have an interesting background, I think, behind your subject. Okay, so I've darkened off where that petal is. Potentially I could just make all of that dark and turn it into just plain background. And then down underneath the flower, across here, it's quite dark through there. And then at the bottom of the picture, there's a little bit of branch and foliage, I guess, hanging around through there. I'm just going to blur that off gently. So now we've got this nice dark background. If you wanted to smooth that off, you can run your fingers through it. Just gently, gently rub it around. Don't press too hard. If you press really hard, it kind of takes the charcoal off. So this is willow charcoal. It's very soft and it tends to be quite movable, which is lovely. But as I said, if you press too hard, it kind of just rub it off the paper. And then you might lose your darkness. And if that happens, you can just come back in again and darken off in a couple of places. So if you notice, you can see it clearly on your black and white version. There's a kind of a range of darks and lights through that background there. So some areas are darker than others, and the shapes are all a little bit random. So you can kind of fiddle around with that a little bit and have a bit of fun with the background. And when we do it in colour, you'll be able to do some beautiful greens and purples and things like that to create some really gorgeous tones and shades, values. Okay. Now see how the bottom down here, I've kind of lost all those little branches and things in the stem. So what I can do now to get those back in is use my kneadable eraser and just knead it to a shape that will work to create those. And you kind of draw with it almost. I'm just going to draw with that, get a few of those shapes back in. They don't need to be terribly specific, but we just want to indicate that, you know, there's a little bit of foliage through there. And maybe this little curl here could be, you know, part of the leaf or the petal. And then the stem is the same thing. What you need to do though is keep kneading the eraser so that you find a clean part, because what happens is if you pick up the charcoal with it like that, see it gets on the tip of your eraser, you could literally put charcoal back down again. So you just want to clean it off like that, or find a clean edge, and then you can draw a nice new mark with it. If you want to get it whiter, you just go over it again and whiten it up. So the kneadable erasers are really helpful for doing that kind of thing, especially with charcoal. Alrighty, so now we've got the darkest background in there. The next thing to look at is the shading in the flower. So you can see there's quite a lot of white. So the whitest section, I didn't put that shadow in there, did I? The whitest section is on just a couple of spots on those petals. So you can see there's white down here on this left-hand petal. So what I want to do is try to leave that one undone. Just use the paper colour to be the white. Maybe clean up the edges a little bit. If you've gone over the edges with your charcoal, you can use your kneadable eraser just to whiten that up a bit more. So we want to keep that bit nice and white and bright. And there's another little white bit down here, just under there. And then we've got white over here on the right-hand side. This lovely big petal on the right is very, very bright. And it's got shadow on it from the one below. And then we've got white in the centre there. So let's pick up this stick of charcoal, just very lightly shading where you see a soft grey. Okay. Remember, we can take charcoal off if we need to put the white back in. So if you go over the white bits, don't stress too much. Just try to keep it light. So see around the edges of this petal, this top left one, I've got a little bit of grey happening through there, and I'm just pushing it in with my finger because I just want to create a really gentle tone. And then we can sort of very lightly, what I'm doing here is I've still got my charcoal on its side, but I'm tilting it slightly. So I'm using the tip of it, but I'm not getting a sharp line. It's more of a blurred, soft kind of fuzzy line. And that's what I want to get, to try and get the different shadows or tones that you can see there in the purple of the flower. So again, I just lay my charcoal on a flat like that, and then tilt it just a tiny bit to get this, see that softer mark? If I tilt it a little bit, I just get a softer mark, and it's not a hard line like it would be if I tipped up and used the edge of it. So see, if I use the very tip, I can get a nice sharp hard line. If I lie it down, tilt it a little bit, just slightly, I can get these lovely soft marks. And if you press lightly, you'll get a softer line. Press harder, you'll get a much harder, darker line. But that's how I like to try and get soft marks or soft lines, just by using the end of the pastel and tilted slightly, rather than the tip of it to try and, change the width or the thickness of it when you're doing a hard line with the end of it. So, and it's the same principle with pastels too. So I do that a lot with pastels. So it's really how you hold the stick of pastel and how you move it on the page that has a big impact. All right, so let's move on around this. So now we've got the same thing is going on over here on this petal. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I'm just going to shade it in a bit with some grey. Now we need to get the grey in because then the white will glow. So to make the light glow, you've got to have dark or grey or mid or something around it. So you can't get light to be light without dark around it. It's a good thing to remember. So I've just smudged all of that in lightly to get that lovely mid-tone shade. And then again, I'm just going to use my charcoal on its side, tilted slightly to get that soft line coming down to create the little wrinkles in there. And then if it's too dark or too heavy, you can just smudge it in with your finger or take it off with your eraser. Okay. And while we're doing that kind of action, we may as well pop into the bottom petal, because around the bottom of this petal is the same sort of tones, I guess, or shapes. So let's pop down in there and do the same kind of thing. Sometimes you forget what you did, so it's good to sort of do the same thing at the same time, and that way it's all consistent. So doing the same thing down around there. And remember, I can always get back into the background later and darken that off again. So something like sharpening up those edges with my charcoal to darken off under there. It's really dark under there. Okay, so just do that soft little shape through there. Now, what we need to look at next are the shadows. So we have this beautiful petal, or the shadow on this petal through here. See how that's got a lovely little shadow on it on the left-hand side? Now, it's not really dark, so I've made it a bit too dark there. So I'm just going to smudge it with my fingers and lighten that off a little bit. So notice that it's darker than the other petal around it. So in here, now let's just see. In here, on this left-hand big petal, it's lighter in the center as it comes out to the edges. So what you can do is use your eraser to lighten off around there. And then we can darken off in here, in this bit, but we don't want it really dark because we've still got darker bits to do. So don't go too dark yet. And that's kind of a nice mid-grey, okay? And you'll notice that it's a little bit lighter. So now we're looking at tones, all right? It's a little bit lighter just inside this section here. So I'm using my eraser again, just to get a little bit off. I'm not pressing very hard. I just want to get a bit of variation in the tone there. See how that works really nicely? So that's lightened it up a little bit in there. And that's giving me a really beautiful tone. So we will do the same sort of thing with our pastels, probably not using the eraser quite so much, but it's all about playing with the tones. And when you do that, it helps to distinguish distance and perspective within whatever you're painting. So this started off just as lines that didn't really make much sense. They're just all lines and shapes. But as we start to add the tones, that's when it starts to come alive. That's when it all starts making sense. And you can see one petal will be sitting in front of the other one will be behind that one. And you'll be able to figure out where the petals sit, all based on how much grey is in there, basically. All right, so let's move up into this section here. So remember we said before, this section here, between these two big petals at the back, is a shadow. So that's the shadow of the left petal sitting in behind the right petal. Now, why do I know that? Well, I don't for sure, but I'm just figuring out that that must be the shadow, and the light must be coming from behind this flower, or is it above? Hard to say really, because this left and right petal have light shining on them. Or maybe it's in front. Must be in front. And then we can see the shadows of the petals that sit behind the others because they're so transparent. Okay, so let's just draw in this shadow here. So this shadow is around about the same tone of grey as the little petal we've just done. Okay, so we need to make that little grey colour, and then it comes down underneath that darker petal we just did. And as it comes down, it gets a little bit darker just inside there. And again, that's going to help to send it behind the one we've just done. Okay, and if you want it to be a tad lighter, you can gently push it around with your fingers. And it's got that little dark, which must be a shadow of the petal we've just drawn on here. Okay, so that's a darker shadow again. So just noticing all those little differences between shadow and light. And if I've gone over the one in front, I can just use my eraser and clean the edges up. Erasers are wonderful for that. So see how that's starting to come alive now? Just want to smush this in a little bit up here. All right, now let's move around. So we've got this big one on the right here, and again, that's a shadow of the one below. So let's pop some charcoal in there, and that's got to be a bit darker than the petal above it. So this area has to be slightly darker so that it looks like shadow. And then see how down here between the shadow we just did and this one, we've got this beautiful little shape through there where we've got this glow of white just in here. So that's the glow of the petal coming through between these two shadows. Okay, so that's important, and we need to make sure that stays really white so that the darkness of the shadow makes it glow and shine. Okay, and then as we come around, we've got this really white petal here, so I'm not going to put any charcoal in that one. And then the bottom one here is slightly darker. Again, that's got a shadow on it. So we're just looking at everything as a shape. You don't have to work out why it's there or where it came from. If it's there, it's meant to be. And it's all got to do with the light and the tone. So just make sure you get those specific shapes in there. And then down through this bottom petal, we've got some really beautiful shadows happening down across the edge here. So it's also a darker grey down through here. And this is where you need to be aware of the background. So we've got to make sure that background's nice and dark so that this, even though it's grey, it still needs to look light against that background. Okay, so I'm just getting some shadow tones down through the edges of this one. Down through there. And there's a bit of shadow down through here as well. Okay. And remember to leave those white sections nice and white. And if you haven't done that, then you can fix it up with your eraser. just seeing I need to show a bit more white through there. And a bit through there. So the eraser is wonderful for getting your light back in. And on this bottom petal here, we've got this beautiful bit of light down through here too. So all these things help to tell us about the tones and the light and the dark. So see how that's starting to make more sense? It's coming together now because we've got all our tones going on. All right, so next thing we want to do is just quickly mark in these dark purple sections. And I'm just going to use my short stumpy piece again because I can get a kind of a wider mark on the end of that without having a hard line. Often you don't want a really hard line, you just want a soft line. So find a part of the charcoal that will give you that, or pastel, whatever you're working with. So see that I've darkened off that lovely dark purple. And when you look at the tones of that darkest purple, it's as dark as the background. So you want to make it really dark and strong because that's going to make the lights pop. And then coming down into this bottom petal, the purple section has sort of two sections, doesn't it? It sort of comes up and all the edges are a little bit jagged or rough. So it's not a smooth edge on that. But we want to get that nice and dark through there. There's also a few little light areas through there. It's like it's got little lines in there. We'll darken that off for now. And then come up to the right-hand petal. And again, it's got a lovely dark purple section in there that kind of comes out from the center. Now, the other thing that's interesting is the shadow on this petal. So remember we did the shadow in here and we've got the darker purple. But you can see there's a spot of lighter purple, the dark purple that's lighter, just here where the light's hitting it. So that's going to be a little bit of a different tone to the rest of that dark purple bit. So I can just lighten that off a little bit through there. That, again, reinforces that shadow. Okay, so that's probably going to be enough that we need to do at this point for the black and white sketch. It's just, as I said, it's a little practice run. It's a way to get familiar with our painting and to practice and notice the shapes and all the other bits and bobs and just have, you know, familiar with the way it sits and all the parts about it. So if you're ready to, we can now move on and do the color version. I'm just cleaning up all my edges to try and sharpen them up a little bit so they look nice and crispy. And of course, we'll do a lot more detail on the color version. So I try to keep this part quite quick so that we don't get too bogged down in the, you know, black and white section. But it is a really good way just to practice your picture and to rehearse it, basically. It's always good to do a rehearsal, and you'll find your art will be much better if you do that. So make sure you have a little practice run before you commit to your colour. Okay, so you could potentially carry on with this with the black and white and just keep doing it. Charcoal is a beautiful medium to work with and make that little flower pop even more. But you can see already how that white is starting to look like the light's catching those bits. And, you know, we've got the different tones for the shadows. And that's what's really important when you're doing your art. So let's move on now and get ready for our next segment. Lovely. So the next section will be, first off, we're going to be choosing some colours, so some pastel colours to use in our painting today. And I'll talk through those now. So I have picked out a few, probably got a few too many actually. I try to keep my palette minimal, but it never seems to work out because I keep finding more colours that I want to use. What I do when I'm picking my colours is I just kind of take the picture and hover it over my pastels and find the colours that sort of match. Now, you don't always have to paint true to colour. You could potentially do any colours you like. But for these classes, I like to try and keep it as real as we can. And then you've got some license or, you know, enough information then to go ahead and create your own with your different colours if you want to. All right, so what I've got here, I'm going to work through them with you from dark to light. I've got a black, I think. Yep. Black's very strong. It's not something I use a lot of, but it is really good if you want to get some drama happening. That will probably be best in some of the background areas to get it nice and dark. I've got a dark green. So this is a new pastel. It's a Jackson's. Jackson's is an online art supplies store, and they make their own pastels. I've never tried them before. So I bought a couple. And I thought, I just want to see what they're like. So we'll test those out. But that's a lovely dark green that I picked up from there. So that'll be lovely in the background as well, just to get those darks nice and rich. Of course, I have my usual blue violet or red violet. I think that's a red actually. So this is the phthalo red violet. It's a lovely dark red, and it's got a lovely tone to it. It's much warmer than a black. And it just is really beautiful for your darks. So that'll be nice in some of the shadows and even in the flower in the darker areas. I did pick up this blue. I'm not sure why. I thought I saw some blue in there. I might not have, but I'm going to keep it just in case I feel like I want to add that in somewhere. Often the blue helps to create the purples that you're looking for. So I thought a bit of blue would be nice. It's an ultraviolet blue. Ultramarine, sorry. My next darkest one is another green. So that's another green. It's not quite as dark as the first one, but it's got a lovely warm tone to it. So that's a lovely grassy kind of green. If you don't have these two greens, then just one will do. So you don't have to have everything I've got here. Yeah, but just try to make sure you've got, 2 or 3 greens, 2 or 3 purples. And if you don't have that really rich purple in the center there, you probably be able to make that with some red and blue. So often we don't have all the colors that you see, and you might have to mix them. And that's the fun bit with pastels. You get to mix them on the paper. My next darkest is this gorgeous magenta. Now, you may not have that one. And if not, then we can try to make it with red or blue, red and blue. But it's really beautiful, and I love, love, love that color. I think it's my favorite color. And then I've got a purple. So that's that beautiful purple I can see in the petals there around the edges. This magenta I can see in the center. So that's that rich reddy purple in the middle there. Beautiful. Okay. I think this purple's the same as that one. I just got 2 little bits because I didn't have a big bit. I may as well go to the next purple. So this is a lighter purple. It's a bit more violet. So that might be nice in the lighter sections down through the petals there, a little bit of that. And then I've got a couple more greens. So I've got this lovely bright green. It's lovely. So that'll be nice for some of the lighter greens in the background, just for a bit of sunshine. And then I have this green as well. So that's a little bit duller. Same kind of tone, but slightly more milky or cooler. And then I've got yellow. So you can see there's yellow in the center of the flower. This is a lovely, rich, beautiful goldy yellow. It's really nice. It's also a bit scratchy, that one. Yeah. And then I've got a lighter yellow as well. So I don't know about you, but I can see a bit of yellow in the petals, just around the edges there. There's a little bit of very pale lemony sort of colour. So we could pop a bit of yellow into there. And then I've got this very, very pale violet. So it looks almost white. If you don't have that one, don't worry. We can just use white. But I saw that in all those light areas, because to me, the flower is not actually white. It's very, very light purple. But as I said, if you don't have light purple, then a white will be fine. So that's my white bit. You can't see it on the white paper very well. So that's pretty much my little palette. I may or may not use all of those, I don't know, but I just like to have them there in case. And then if I find I want something and I haven't got it there, I can go and find it in my selection over there. So that's the little colour selection. I'll leave that there for you to see while we go and have a little tea break. Before I do that though, I'm just going to talk about paper. So I've chosen green today because that happened to be in my drawer, and I thought, oh, it's not a bad colour. And I can see there's lots and lots of green in this picture. So I thought a green paper would be nice. But as I said in the notes, you could have anything really. You could have black, a violet, mid-grey, anything like that would be a good colour. If you're going to fill the whole thing in, doesn't really matter. But it is nice sometimes to incorporate the colour of the paper into your painting. So, for instance, this green may kind of supplement some of the green in the background that I might not have to fill the whole thing in, which is always nice because it takes a bit of work and you lose some fingerprints when you're blending all the background in a lot. And I've just got this on a little board, so it's just on a little bit of board, and I've taped down my corners lightly. I've used this tape last time. You can see it's not very sticky anymore. So I like to tape my corners down, and that just keeps the paper nice and still on the board, so I can not need two hands to hold it down. Okay, so what we're going to do is have a little 10-minute break, and that will give you time to set up your paper, pick out your colours, maybe do your drawing if you want to, and we can get stuck into it. So I shall be back very soon after we have a break. Hi, so now we're back, and I have coffee, so all is well. Let's get started on drawing this up if you haven't done that already. So what we need to do first up is pop your grid line on. Now, if you're on a dark piece of paper, you might find it easier to use perhaps a lighter pastel pencil, just so you can see it. But make sure when you do pop it on that you don't press too hard, because sometimes it's hard to get those marks off. So I'll just do mine in white so that it's easy to see. If you have a pencil that might be a pale pink or a light green or something that's not too bright, then that's also a really good option. So it's just got to be so you can see it yourself and be able to get it off fairly easily afterwards. So what I'm doing is finding my halfway marks. So this is a 23 by 30 bit of paper. So my halfway for the tall side is 15, half of 30 is 15, and the other one is 11 and a half, so that's half of 23. It's around about 23, just under. Okay, so once you've got your grid line on, then you want to be doing just what you did before when we did the charcoal sketch, and that is to just draw up your outlines basically. Don't worry about all the shading and things. You just want to get the basic shape in there. And once we've got that on, then we can put the background in kind of around it. And that means that we'll leave the part where the flower is going to be clean. So we'll try not to get too much pastel underneath where the flower is going to be, because that will just keep the paper nice and clean and will allow us to keep the colours nice and light and bright. All right, so I've got this drawn in now, and I'm just going to do the same thing we did earlier with marking in where everything needs to sit in relation to the grid lines. And I'll do the same sequence as well. So working from the left-hand side, top side, and then coming in and down like that. So you can see I'm holding my pencil quite loosely. If I hold it as if I'm writing like that, then you get a much more defined mark, which is wonderful if you want to do fine detail. But for this kind of sketching up, I like to keep my hand fairly loose, because it just allows me then, it allows the pencil to wander across the page. It doesn't let it press too hard, so that means my mark's still quite light. So if I needed to take it off like this with my kneadable eraser, it'll come off pretty easily. If you press very hard, you'll find it'll be harder to take it off. So just make sure you press pretty light, just enough so you can see what you need to see. All right, so do your outline of the petal in here, and then again we can draw in that little shape that comes up through the center area and down Just keeping your pencil nice and light, and then up through here, and we've got that lovely little dip that comes down through there. And then you have your, if you wanted to mark in your dark purple section, you could do that as well. Okay, so they're my basic shapes for this bit. I need to take that up higher. So as you go, just check your heights, check that everything is intersecting where it needs to be. That's the important thing, and that's why the grid is so useful, because you can actually measure where everything has to meet or intersect. So that's basically that side. And then I'm going to move across and carry on through here. Okay, so that goes through, and then this particular petal might continue down actually and carry on down through there. So that's basically the shape of that one. So you can see that dark shape coming down on the next petal over. And then we've got, so they kind of cross over each other, and we have this beautiful shadow then. Okay, so I'm bringing that one all the way out to there. That comes out pretty close to the edge of your page. So it's pretty central really. It's filling up the page mostly. It's just at the center of the flower, because of the angle that it's on, is sitting slightly off to the left, which is good. Okay, so that's that petal there, and then I can bring up this shape here. And see, when you know that they all join up, or what belongs to where, you can kind of just carry on all the way around. Because we've already done this in the practice sketch, so it's good to, that's why it's so good to have done that, because we're familiar with it now, and you kind of know where things need to be. You have a better idea of it. Okay. And then coming down onto that bottom petal, so it fans out over the next one underneath, and it takes up, you know, this beautiful round shape across through here. I've gone a bit low, I think. So it comes across at about the halfway point on the bottom grid line, so about there, and then up through into the other side. So see how you can kind of continue on through now, because we've already done it once. And then you can kind of join all the dots, make everything work together, and just put all those little lines in so we can find our way around it to get the background in there. So that's pretty much the basic shape that we need to have happening. I'm just going to put a little circle where that yellow centerpiece is. I know it's not a pure circle, but it's kind of gives you a guide then for where to take that dark purple stain, I'm going to call it, into the middle. Okay, lovely. All right, so that's our basic shape. And that's about all the information you probably need to have at this point. Now, have you decided whether you're going to do both the stems or just the one? Are you going to put in that petal on the bottom right or not? I'm going to choose not to. If you look at the black and white picture, you can see it's all a little bit blurry anyway, and it doesn't really look like anything. So the only reason it looks like something in the colour version is because it's purple. But that's up to you. If you want to pop it in, you can. If you don't want to, you don't need to. But I'll just mark in the stem, and then we can start working on the background. So we're going to block in the background first, and then we'll come and do the flower. I'm just thinking, I wonder if it would be better to do it the other way around. You could do it either way with this particular picture. Normally I like to work from the background first so that everything is done that's in behind, and then I like to work on whatever's in the front and come forward. Yep, I think we will do that as per usual. However, if you didn't want to do that, if you wanted to do the flower first, you could potentially do that. Then you could put the background in around it, because it's got such distinct edges. You could literally get in around it quite easily. Most of the time when I do a background first, it's because it's going to be too hard to get in behind something. For instance, trees or, you know, whatever it is. So I find it easier to put the background in first and then do the subject. So we'll do that, but just know that you do have options if you want to do it differently. Okay, so I'm going to start, let's start up in this left-hand corner again. We might go round clockwise like we did with the drawing. And you can see in the background, it's really dark up in this section. So it's really dark, mostly on the left side, isn't it? If you look at the background on all of the left side, it's pretty dark. And then we've only got a little bit of brighter green over here on the right and a few smudges of it here and there. So I'm going to start with this dark green. It's a similar colour to my paper. So that's good. And I'm going to put this where I can see dark. Now, what I'm going to do is put this down first. And what you want to do is just get a short piece of pastel. So probably, how long is that? It's an ideal kind of size, maybe 3 centimetres long. So if you have longer sticks, you might want to break them so that you have shorter pieces. That way you can lie it flat on your paper like this and you've got a bit more control over where it goes. Whereas if I had a really long stick, like this one, for instance, it's not really long, but that width is harder to manage on a small piece of paper. So I would have to break that to use it the way I like to use it. I'm just going to put this everywhere I see dark, which is pretty much everywhere. So let's just smush this. This is a dark green all around on my paper. Yeah, I'm going to go over the stem. I know where the stem is. I can put that back in after. And when you're going around the flower, just try to sort of overlap it slightly because we don't want to have like a big gap between the flower and the background. So you want to sort of overlap those edges a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this green everywhere. Now, potentially I could just use the green paper and not put a background on at all. That's another option. And it's another nice thing about pastels is that you can do that. You don't have to, fill everything in. You can actually use the paper colour to become part of your art. Okay, so that's a bit of dark green. Now, next thing I'm looking at the colours in this background and I can see that deep, deep purpley colour, that dark reddy colour. I'm not going to call it black because black's a little bit too harsh. And if there's somewhere on there later that I want to make really, really dark, I can do that with black. So by using colours that are not quite as dark as black, I still leave myself the option to use it later. And I think these warmer colours, this beautiful purpley blue violet or red violet, is much warmer and much, much nicer as a background. So just zhoosh some of that around. Again, put the pastel on its side, a short piece, and just try to change the direction that you're moving it in. So as I'm running around the paper, and I'm not putting it absolutely everywhere, I'm just putting it here and there selectively, but I'm trying to pull it around in different directions just to create a little bit of movement or interest. Now what we'll do is we'll push all this in with our fingers and blend it in. So it's not going to stay looking like this. We'll push it in and that will give it a lot more strength.
Sorry, Jeannie, what colour was that? The red violet?
Red violet, which is similar to blue violet. So the blue violet is that really dark one. I don't have it here with me, but it's a deeper purple, but the red or blue violet would be fine. It's just a bit warmer than the black. And mixed with the green, it's going to make some really yummy, yummy, muddy sort of dark, warm, gorgeous. Be really, really nice. Where it's darker, you could put a little bit more of it down, but knowing that we can always add black or something else to darken it off more later if you want to. So I like to leave myself space, I guess, to adjust the tones as we go. And it's the same when I'm working with lights. I like to not go straight to white. I like to save my white till the very end because that way I've always got something lighter. You know what I mean? Yeah. Cool, cool. So now we've got some of that smushed in. Let's pick up some of your lighter greens. So you might have a light green like this one. And just notice on the picture where there's a bit of light green. So there's a little bit of it across the base here, across the bottom. Now that's going to be branches of other plants or, something, some sort of foliage there in the background. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. We just want to get the tone of this down here. Okay, so a little bit of lighter green. This is not the bright yellowy green that I can see in the picture. I'm going to pop that in too. I just want to get this basic lighter green smushed in first, because when we push it all around, it's just going to start to give it a really nice, I don't know, pattern, I suppose. Well, not that we want to make patterns, but just something interesting. If you just have a flat coloured background, it's nice, but it's, a bit boring. But if you can add a bit of depth like this, it just makes it a bit more exciting and interesting. So I've smushed a bit of my lighter green around on there. You can see it's sort of starting to come together. And now I'm going to grab my bright green. So remember I said there's a bit of bright green around here. It's kind of a limey colour. You might not have exactly the same colour, but something like that would be good, just to get a bit of that brightness through there. And I'm just going to lightly mark in the stem because it's that brighter yellowy green as well. That's not the final stem, but I'm just marking it in around about where it's going to sit. And because I've put a light green down and then I'm putting this brighter one over the top, it's going to make it hopefully glow a little bit more. So that's starting to look a little bit more interesting now. So once you've got enough pastel on your paper, and this is the secret, you need to make, if you're going to blend it in like we're about to, you need to make sure you've got enough pastel on the paper, because if you don't, you just end up, hurting your fingers and there's not enough colour to push around. So I've got a fair bit on there. If we find there's not enough after we've blended in this level or layer, then we can add some more. So this isn't the last gasp at all. You've got lots and lots of opportunity to change that up a little bit. So let's start top right or left. What I'm going to do as I blend this in, you'll see I'm moving my finger, kind of little wiggly movements, but randomly. So I'm not going up and down or left to right or round and round. I'm just kind of trying to vary my movements. And what that does, hopefully, is give it a nice natural sort of effect and pushes these colours together without blending them too much, because if you push hard and keep blending, you're going to make these really muddy grey colours, which often is beautiful. But in this instance, I don't want to do that. I want to try and keep some of the green sort of vibrant with a little bit of dark around it, etc. So I'm just doing these little random movements, and make sure that you slightly overlap the edges of your flower, because as I said earlier, we don't want to have a halo or a gap between your flower and your background. So see how that's just gently merging. So this is just layer one. If it's not looking any good, don't stress. We're going to come back and add some more, and that's when you can start to kind of finesse it a little bit more. You can add some more colour if you want to. I'm thinking a bit of that blue might be nice in there, just to give it a bit more warmth and interest. But you can see just by pushing the colours around, and just sometimes you just don't have to press very hard. Just press nice and light, and that'll retain the value and the tone and the brightness or the darkness of the colour. I've just come across my grid lines, so I'm finding I'm having to press a little bit firmer where they are to cover them up. So see how easily that white pastel pencil, I think it was charcoal actually, marks the paper. You really have to sometimes work pretty hard to cover up those marks, and that's why we want to keep them really light when you're drawing up your shapes and things. So just gently running my finger around and around, up and down, round and round, sideways, all kinds of directions, because I'm imagining that if this is in a garden, then you're going to have all sorts of different shapes and directions of things. And so you can create that look just by the way you move your fingers around. So gently, round and round. And see, as you might be finding that it's getting a bit dirty and muddy and dull looking. And if that's happening, that's okay. We can add more of the brights and more of the darks. Don't stress. It's normal. So when you're doing pastels, you kind of go through this ugly stage where it just looks like a big schmozzle. And you start to think to yourself, oh my goodness, is this ever going to work? Promise me it will. I promise it will. You just got to stick with it. Just not give up. You can potentially use 2 or 3 fingers if you wanted to push all of this in. What I'm doing is imagining the leaves and the foliage and the branches and the dirt and whatever else is in here, and just trying to kind of move my finger around in the direction that those things might be growing together. So it's got this beautiful blurry sort of background now. It's nice. So that's all those little colours kind of merged in nicely together. Now, if you're happy with what you've got going on, then by all means, just leave it be. If you want to add more dark or light, then go for that. I think I said I want to pop some blue in, so I'm going to see what happens when I do that. I like to experiment a little bit with my colours. So, and you don't have to paint exactly what you see. You can make this yours. So if you want to add blue or red or whatever into the background, feel free to do that because it's your choice. And you know, there's blue in the sky, so there could be some blue reflecting off some of the foliage around there. So I think the blue looks quite lovely actually. And I'm also going to put some of that magenta in because I like to sort of use the same colour that I'm going to use in my subject in some of the background. It just ties it in together and kind of makes it all work nicely. So sometimes it's a good idea to, you know, try to use a similar or the same colours in at least one other place in your picture painting. So see, I've just popped a bit of blue here and there, just in random spots. Doesn't have to be, you know, in anything in particular. And then I'm just going to try this Jackson's green. So I don't know if this is a little bit darker than the other one I had. It is a tad. So maybe that could be my darkest green. I'm just going to peel off some of the paper. So when you have a new pastel, you normally want to peel off the paper, which is kind of annoying because unless you're really fanatical about it, I don't record the colour or anything. So if you ask me next week what this pastel is, I probably wouldn't have any idea. So, but if you are, you know, interested in doing that, you could make yourself a little swatch book or something, and you could, you know, put a little mark on the book and then write down Jackson's Deep Olive Green 543, and then a year down the track when you want to get that colour again, it's great because you'll be able to know where it came from, and so that would be a really good system, but I'm not that organised. I wish I was. Or you could keep the label and stick it on. I don't know, but there's all sorts of options. But if you do want to refer back to your colours, then, you know, you've got to find a way to sort of record the systems, or make a system, I should say, and record them. Anyway, so now I've got this naked bit of pastel. It's quite a short-ish stick. So what I'm going to do is break it because it's actually too big. When I lie it down on my paper like that, I'm finding it's too clunky. It's too big. I don't want it to be that wide. It's also, because it's handmade, it's not super flat, so it's kind of got bumpy bits and it's not giving me a nice even coverage. So I'm going to break it, which is kind of heartbreaking sometimes, but that's a much more manageable size to be working on this A4 paper. It's given me some dust, so I'm just going to push that in too. And as you work flat, if you work flat like I am today, you might find you gather a little bit of dust on your paper. So what you want to do is have a bit of paper towel or something next to you to tip it off with. I see so many pastel artists blowing their dust off as they go, and it's instinctual, and you know you want to blow it, but if you do that, it ends up all over yourself and your house and your furniture and everywhere. And it's messy. So try really hard not to blow it all over the place. It's probably not that healthy either. So this is quite a nice green. It's a little darker than the one I had before, and I've got to kind of rub it to make it flat because it's not quite flat enough. But see how that's giving me a really nice interest in the background there. So I can just zhoosh this around in some of the dark places. I'm leaving out that purple petal, not a fan, don't need that, but by all means pop it in if you like it. So that dark green's quite lovely. I think I might just try and keep most of it over on that left side because the left is a little bit darker than the right. And again, as the artist, you get to choose those things. I'm just going to very lightly push this around. So what I'm noticing with this particular pastel is it's quite dusty. Some are dustier than others, but that's leaving a fair bit of dust on my page. Okay, so it's good to try different brands and see what you like or don't like. And they all have a different purpose, I suppose. So I'm pretty happy with how my background's looking, and just remember to try and leave, you know, a couple of light spots and a couple of dark spots. That's what makes it interesting, because we want to kind of suggest that the sun's dappling through, catching on the leaves in the background. You know, it's a lovely day out in the garden or somewhere. So I can literally just come back in with my light green. That's that lovely limey bright green, and put a few more blotches around, mostly on this right hand side where I can see there's sun. I'm just blotching some of that on. You might find to get it to stick over what you've already put down, you might have to press a little bit harder. That's okay, you can do that. But as I said, different pastels behave differently. If they're a little drier or harder, then you'll have to be a bit firmer with your marking. If they're soft and creamy, they'll stick really easy and they'll be less dusty. Soft and creamies are beautiful for your final layers. Your harder pastels are good for drawing and for getting your lines down initially. There, I think that's quite nice. So thing is, if we need to come back afterwards and change the background up a little bit or darken it off or whatever, you can. So it's not like you can't come back and, you know, do more to it afterwards. I just like to work in the order from back to front. But this particular one would be reasonably easy to get back into around the flower afterwards if you wanted to do a bit more work on the background. Okay, but I think I'm going to leave mine right there. I like how the blue's reacting with the green, and that little bit of red violet is quite nice. It's giving me that sort of warm purpley tinge. I was going to throw some of this magenta in there. Let's see what happens. Ooh, it's beautiful, isn't it? That's nice. Yeah, can't help myself. I have to put some in. It's just the best colour ever. If you've got purple or even red might be nice. Red and green can get very muddy very quickly, so be a little bit careful not to make too much mud, but it will definitely warm it up. Cool. So a bit of that in there is nice. And as I said, we can come back in afterwards and add a bit more if you want to. You know, that could potentially just be flowers way away in the distance or something. So notice how I've left most of my flower undone. And the reason for that is now I've got clean paper underneath. And when I put my light colours down, like this, for instance, so where would that go? In here somewhere. Then it's really light. It's beautiful and light, and it catches the light, doesn't it? So if I had green or background under that, it would be much harder to get it that bright. So when you have a light area like that on the flower, you want to try and keep the paper nice and clean underneath and not contaminate it. Unless, of course, you want to give it that, you know, bit of tone or shadow or whatever. But I think that light is just going to pop. And that's my pale purple. So that wasn't white. I'll show you white. Don't know if you can see the difference on there, but there's a slight difference. So you can see the white's quite white, and then this has a very, very slight pinky tinge to it. So again, if I use this one in my lights and then I think, oh, I just want one little ping of highlight somewhere, I can use my white to add that. So that's why I save my white for last. Try not to use that at all until I need it for the really bright bits. I'll just rub that in so it's not too much. All right, so let's get moving on the next bit. First, I've got to tip off some of this dust because it's annoying me. So as I said, if you have some paper towel like this, and then I just lie that beside me on my table, make it nice and flat. And then at the end of class or whenever I'm finished painting, I can just roll that up and throw it away. If you're into saving your dust, your pastel dust, then you can tip it onto something maybe a little bit smoother. Alfoil is really good. And then you can pop it into a little jar and save it up for when you want to make some pastels. Okay, so next bit, I'm just rearranging myself here, getting things out of the way. I like to have space. Excellent. All right, where are my colours? Here they are. I always start off with my colours in order from light to dark, and then they just get all messed up. That's okay. So next thing we want to do is start to look at this flower and figure out the order that we're going to do it in. So if you look at the petals, I'll just grab the picture for a sec. You can see that these two big back petals sit behind these ones. So they will be the two that we need to do first because they're behind, and then we can work forward and start on these front petals. So these two overlap each other. And I don't know which is which, but I think this is the shadow of that. So that's got this, the right petal's got to be in front if that's the shadow, or vice versa. Could be either. Who cares? Doesn't matter. As long as we get the tones and colours in the right place, it really does not matter. So we'll do those two first, and we'll start with light in the middle here, because you can see the light sort of fanning out from the centre. And then as we get out to the edges, we get these beautiful purples. So we'll use a darker purple to the edge, and then the lighter one coming in from the edge and towards the middle. This shadow section here will be a darker purple. And then when we've got those bits done, we'll work forward. So we'll probably do this right-hand petal next. And same thing with that, just figure out where the light is and where the tones are. And to do that, you can always refer back to your black and white version to find those tones. So we'll do that one, and then we'll do the left one. So that's a little bit more complicated, just the shapes of that, but essentially the left petal is quite light or really bright under here. And then we've got this top section here that's a bit more subdued. And then we've got our beautiful purple in the middle. And then we'll do in the final petal here. And as we go, we'll work on the middle. So we're going to do this together, step by step. All right, so let's get started on those two outer petals at the back. Make sure you've got your picture propped up nice close so you can see it easily. You don't have to kind of bend your neck or your head too far to have a look at it. I've also got it on my iPad next to me, so I can zoom in and have a look at the colours up nice and close. You also often get a much clearer picture if you've got it on a screen. Alrighty, let's get cracking. So, as I said, the middle of these two back petals is quite light. So what I'm going to do is use my very light lilac-y colour and just put a little bit of that down. So we're just going to go lightly, okay, and out to nearly the edge, almost the edge. Just want to press nice and light. Same on the other side. Try to kind of leave those other shapes empty if you can, because everything affects everything. So when you're layering your pastels, whatever's underneath is going to affect the colour on top, which is what is great about them, because you can actually you know, manipulate your colours quite beautifully and create some really nice combinations by mixing them around. So I've got a bit of light on there. Just going to go a bit firmer down in towards the centre, just because I want to be able to push that around a little bit. So you actually need to have a bit of pastel on the paper to push it around. Okay, so they're my light bits. All right, pop that away. And now my purples. So my darker purple is this one. And then I've got this sort of lighter purple. So the darker one is kind of more red, isn't it? And that's what I think, anyway, is around the outside of this. So I'm just comparing this now, because what I'm looking at is the difference between the background and this colour. And in tone, they're not actually that different. So the edges of this might get a little bit lost in the darkness of the background. So that's telling me two things, or one of two things. I either need to make sure that get that purple a little lighter so that it sits out from the background, or I could let it just kind of merge back into the background and do its thing and be like that. And that's not a bad thing either. Or I can darken the background even more. So they're the kind of choices that you have. And this is why we you know, do little practice runs. Well, this is not necessarily a practice run, but if you were doing a really big painting, it would be a good idea to just do a quick practice on a smaller sheet of paper, just to test things like that, to see, you know, is the tone going to work here? It's all about the tone. So I know that these are similar tones because when I squint my eyes at this, it kind of all blends in together. Because it's the same tone or the same level of colour. So what am I going to do? Let's have a think. What if I use this one? So this is my lighter purple. What if I use some of that in there? Will that jump it forward? Yes, it does. Again, I'm squinting. So always just squint at your colours through your eyelashes, and you can see really well what the tone is doing. So I'm just going to zhoosh a bit of this lighter purple around there over the darker one, because what I want to do is make it a little bit lighter than what I had it. And then just gently pull some of that down into this beautiful pale purple. So you can just literally put your pastel on the paper and pull it down like that. And what that does is it kind of drags the colour underneath as well, but it starts to create this really nice blending sort of effect. See how that's happened? Okay. So now I'm quite happy with how that looks. I know I can come in with my light colour again and go over that and kind of lighten it up and get this light to pull out a bit more. But first, before I do that, I'm going to go over to this other petal first because it's got similar colours in it. So let's do the same process on that one. Okay. We'll get this darker purple down first because I really love that colour. I think it's just quite beautiful. It's got that gorgeous warmth in there. And then we've also got that shadow shape down through there. I'm putting a bit of my dark purple in there as well for the shadow. Okay. And so just zhooshing that around, and I've actually got, anyway, before I get on to the next petal, we want to work on these two because these two sit at the back. So now I've got my lighter purple. I'm just doing the same sort of thing. I'm just running that around the edge over the dark purple to kind of push them in together and then just pulling that down into the light. Purple's such a beautiful colour to work with. Okay. And then that actually comes up to there. So keep checking where things sit in relation to each other. There we go. So those purples are lovely together. So what we want to do now that we've got the darker purple and then the next colour over it, you might have already had a good light purple, so you might not need to do this. But what I want to do is just kind of start to push them together. But as I do that, I'm going to pull them in towards the centre of the petal. So you want to kind of start on the edge, put the little pad of your finger right on the edge there and drag it through. So I'm just kind of running it around and pushing it in towards the middle of the petal. So now we're starting to get this beautiful shading happening. See that happening there? And all I'm doing is pulling my finger very gently all the way through. I know I can come back over and add more if I want to. So if I need to darken it or lighten it, I can do that. But this is the first layer, and I'm just establishing how it all kind of works together. But make sure that you pull your finger from the outside in and out, sort of in the direction to the middle of that petal, because what we're trying to do is create that kind of fan-like pattern that's going on around the outside of it there. Okay, so just pull it in that direction. I'm just going up and down or in and out, picking up some of the light and dragging that up into the purple. As I said, we can redo this again and again. Might not need to, depends on how you think it looks when you've done this part. But if you're happy with it, then you could potentially leave it. If you wanted to add more detail, you can. So it's kind of the foundation layer, I guess you'd call it. So see how that's blended in really beautifully. Very nice, very nice. Okay, now I'm going to pop over to the other one and do the same thing there. I just find if I'm doing one, the same thing in a couple of places, you may as well just carry on and use the same movements and the same colours, etc., to get them the same. Now I know we've got that dark patch there. I'll sort that out in a sec. If you're just going over the edge of it and blending it in, that's okay too. Okay. We can come back over and put that back in. So that's working nicely. That's all starting to look nice and blended. So what I want to do now is lighten up the edges of the flower a little bit more, but also get a few little dark bits in there. See how it's got those little wavy edges on it? So to try and get that happening, I've picked up my darker purple again, and it's almost like it's got little ruffles or a skirt around the edge. And to get that, I'm just using the edge of it to get a finer line and just drawing a few of those little lines in. And what I'm going to do then is just smudge them in with my fingers. So they're not going to stay like that. They're just going to be suggestive of these little crinkly sort of textures that are happening in here. Because that's quite specific to a pansy, isn't it? Is the feeling of the petals, the beautiful little skirt or ruffles around the edge. Okay. So just pull a few in closer to the center, but they've all got to kind of head in that direction. So that's a little bit too strong, but that's okay. What I'm going to do now, do I want to use this or do I need a lighter purple? I might have to go find a lighter purple, I think. Yep, I do need a lighter one. Okay, so I'm just going to go and see if I can find it like a lilac or something like that, that's sort of in between tones of those two. I just want one more tone. No matter how many pastels you have, you'll never have the right colours. All right, so I've grabbed this one. This is the Flinders Blue Violet. It looks to be a little bit lighter. Don't know if that's enough though. So what I'm trying to do is get that feeling of shadow and light on this outer skirt. I don't know if that's light enough. Let's try this one. This is called Jacaranda. Ah, that's better. See how that's just a little bit lighter along there. So when you're doing, just keep checking back at your reference photo to make sure you're getting the right tones going on. So up on the right hand side of this first petal, it's a bit lighter, isn't it? Just over here. So I'm putting this jacaranda. I know this is a full stick and I haven't broken it. I'm just using the end of it very softly at the moment to try and get the feeling of the light and the dark. So you can see I've just put some lines on there, and in a minute I'm going to push them around a little bit with my finger so that they're not quite so obvious. I'm going to blur them a bit. And I just want to get a bit more light in this edge here. Ooh, lovely. Yeah, this jacaranda colour's good. That's nice. And I'm just going to put some of that in here too. So it's not quite as light as that first one I used. It's always nice to have a little range of colours or tones, you know, in your colours. So see how it's getting a lot of dust on there. But what I'm trying to do is create that glow now coming from the middle where it's really light. And then I can pick up my lightest one, which is what we started with, and press a little bit harder to get that to kind of just glow from the middle there and drag it out gently. I'm trying to create that lovely gradual sort of blend from light to dark. Okay, so now I've got a bit of dust on there. I'll tip it off in a sec. But what I want to do now is just to start using my fingers to very gently, just going to go from the edge and in to softly, softly pull those colours down. So I'm just pulling them down to soften off those lines and start to try and create that kind of wrinkly, soft edge around the flower or the petal. Like that. And then I'm going to pull some of this light out towards the edges as well. You might have to wipe your finger off. I should have wiped my finger off in between each one of those little drags, because what happens is your finger picks up the pastel and then you put it back down again and you sort of lose the brightness or the darkness. It all starts to get a bit muddy and messy, but I think this is looking quite not too bad at all. I just want to soften off those lines a little bit more. Don't want them to be too obvious, just subtle, 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 gentle, gentle. So you can really do amazing things depending on how much pressure you apply. So if I pressed really hard on these, they'd just all disappear and then get muddy. So just be careful with how hard you press. This is all part of the technique of using pastels. It's all in the pressure that you apply when you're blending. All right, I reckon that might do for now. I'm going to tip off that dust. It's distracting. There we go. Lovely. And what I probably want to do is come around the edges of this. So I'm just thinking when I want to tidy this up later, to get that edge nice and sharp, you could actually come back with your background green or whatever you've used and just sharpen up around the edge of that petal. I'll show you how. Just like that, to kind of define it a little bit more so it's not quite so blurred on the edges. Or you could do it with your purple. Either way, do it either way. It's a little bit tricky when you've got multicolours in the background to do that, because then it sometimes doesn't sort of line up with what's already there. But you know, they do this with trees when they put sky holes back in, so it's just like little blobs of blue in amongst the branches of the tree to you know, make it look more natural. So what you don't want to do is create a line like I've done around it like that, because it looks like it's been added on after. So it's a little tricky. Or you could come back with your pastel. This is only a short stumpy bit. Maybe turn it around so you can access it better. Just get the sharp edge and kind of define the edges a little bit more. If you can find the edge. Sometimes I struggle to see it over my hand sometimes, so you're not quite sure where it's going to land. But you could do something like that just to get those, or pencil. Pencil's probably your best friend in this instance. Something like that to sharpen up the edges. And then I would just pull it back in. So try not to get right to the edge, but you could pull it back in with the pad of your finger like that to soften it off a little bit. So see how that kind of gives me a nice distinctive edge around the petal. So you could do that. And let's see if it works with this lighter violet colour. It might be a bit too bright, but we'll see. And remember, you want to keep the lines sort of jagged. See how the line's not straight or even all the way around the petal. So it's got this lovely little jagged sort of edge. And again, I'm just pulling that in from the edge to soften off slightly. Probably need to darken that off a bit more there, or cover that up a bit more. So it's a bit fiddly, but that's what flowers are, aren't they? Fiddly. Lovely. This edge here needs to be defined a bit more too. So because it's a little lighter down through here, I can use my lighter pastel and see how that gets that edge lovely and crisp against the background. So I'm just using the end of it. You can use the end to get lovely sharp lines if you have it like a nice sharp edge on it. And then just use the pastel itself to sort of soften it off and blend it in a little bit. So there's lots and lots of ways you can manipulate things and use your pastels to get different marks. You can even, come back in now and add a bit more light if you want to start to drag it out. But I want to move on. We can come back and do details later. I do want to move on to the next petal and get that going as well. So it's a similar process with that one now. So we've got the lovely edge going on. I'm going to come in with this deeper one again and just jag it up the edge. So I'm using the end of my pastel now. So that's the sharp edge to get like a finer line around here. And then we'll do some of those little lines down through there to get the crinkles going on. Like that. And then I can, did I use this one before? I don't know. No, I didn't. Quite nice though, this lovely purpley magenta colour. Down through there. And then the lighter one again, so just put some little lines through there with this one. So it all looks a bit funny until you start to kind of push it in with your fingers a bit more. And then I can come back in with this beautiful light jacaranda and get some of the highlights on there, because again, all these little folds will have a light and a dark side because they've got shadow on them. Okay, and then down into just under here, it's a little bit lighter. So I'm going to pop a bit more of that jacaranda through there and lighten that up a bit. And then we can push it around with some fingers and see what happens. Okay, gently, gently, just pulling, pulling. And I know I can come back over and put more detail in. So this is the lovely thing about pastels. It's not that scary because you can actually redo things quite a lot until you get it how you want it. I'll darken that off while I'm in there, and I'll define that a bit more in a minute. So that's looking okay. Lovely. Tip off my dust. So you can see in the picture there's quite a bit of, dark still going on. So then you can come back in with a little bit like this, just a short stumpy stick, and just gently kind of wipe it across See how that's picking up kind of the texture of the petal too. So in the photo, you can see it's got a fair bit of texture. Probably a little bit more through here than on the other petal that we've just done. And if you just lightly wipe your pastel over that, then what it does is it's picking up the texture of the paper and also showing through the colours underneath. See, it's starting to look like it's glowing now. It's got that beautiful glow happening. I might add a bit more texture over here while I'm thinking about it. So you can kind of come back into other areas and touch up as you go. And just then when you do that, you kind of let that pastel sit on the top. So don't blend this layer in once you've done that. Just let it sit there. And that's what is so lovely, because you get this beautiful glow of all the pastel and colours underneath. And then when you add this gorgeous little, just gentle touch of texture over the top. And again, it'll depend on your paper. So some papers will have more grit than others, or none even. But the paper will determine the texture. And it's quite lovely. So then you don't blend it. So that's the tricky bit, is keeping your fingers out of it when you get to this point. Okay. Now I'm just going to work on this little shadow section here. So you can see under that shadow is quite light. So the light under the shadow is what makes the shadow look dark. So we need to get a bit more light in around there. This is the light blue violet that I was using. So it's not really light. So I'm going to add a bit more of the jacaranda. So see how I'm just kind of blending them both together to get that lovely, gentle little light coming through here. And if you look at your black and white version, you can see it's quite light under that shadow there. So what we need to do is make sure we get that light enough so that it kind of has this, gets this lovely glow going on. And tipping off my dust again. So I think I want to add even more light in there. I just keep referring back to the black and white picture, and it's telling me that that's really quite bright just in there. Okay, so this is where, when something's not quite dark enough or light enough, you always need to add a bit more light or dark, whatever the contrast is, to get it to glow or shine. So that's now going to get that shadow shape to really glow on top of the light there. I might put a bit more of this in here while I'm there, because it's also super bright in there and down in there, but we can do that a bit later. I'm just jumping ahead of myself here, because I like to see, I don't know about you, but I really like to see what my brights are going to look like against the darks as I go. Even though I say save the white for last, it's kind of exciting to just put it in and get a little taste of it. It keeps you inspired, really, because you think, oh yeah, that's going to work. And then you get excited and you want to carry on. So sometimes you've got to give yourself a little bit of joy if you're feeling a bit about it. Okay, let's work on the shadow now. So I've got to decide which purple I want that to be. And it's kind of darker on the edges, isn't it? So it's darker down the edge here. I'm using my darker purple down through there. It's quite sharp and defined. And then it comes up to where the two petals meet. And then it comes out and we've got this little fluffy edge on it, like that. And then as it goes down towards the center, it gets a little bit lighter, doesn't it? So let's darken off this top section. Get a bit of dark in there. And it's a very sharp line, like a hard, distinct line through that middle area. And then I'm going to get a bit of this light. So how light is it? It's not as light as my bright light. So I'm going to try this one first. So this is what you've got to be aware of, is when you're choosing which colour to put where, just looking at your black and white version and say, okay, see the light under the shadow, that light is way lighter than anything in that shadow. So we can't use that light. We can't go that light because it won't make sense. So you've got to stay within the tones, which is why it's nice to have, you know, 4 or 5 different ranges of tones in the purple, because then you can do that. Okay, so that still needs to be a tad lighter. So I'm just going to pick up the next lightest one and gently put that in here. It's just in this section here, in the middle bit where it's a little lighter, and then it darkens off out towards the edges. So just through there. So see how we've created a lovely kind of gradual range from dark to light. Now I've smushed it all in. I've lost that now. Let's try again. So the beautiful thing is we can come back again now over that edge and sharpen that up a bit more. And gradually pull that down, but not all the way. So we just want to keep that fairly distinct between the light and the dark. Softly, softly. And I might even go a tad lighter in here again. There's a little kind of a green shape through there, isn't there? Little, looks like the little bud or something. Okay. Do I want to put some of this in? Try it and see. Just put a little bit of that in there. There. That'll do for now. Tip off some dust because you can see all the dust is sitting around the edges there. It kind of gets in the way. Okay. Now, next we want to, I might just put that little bit of green in here. See, there's a sort of funny little green shape through there. Wasn't that obvious before. I'm just using a mid to dark green to put that in there. If you hear any banging and stuff, it's just my hubby fixing the taps. We've had some water leaking things going on. All right. Probably should be a tad lighter than that, but try a bit of this limey green in there. I don't want it to be too bright because it sort of just merges gently into that purple, doesn't it? Like that. There we go. That'll do for now. All right, let's move on to this right-hand petal here. So it's going to have a slightly different process because it doesn't have as much detail in the shading like these ones do, because it's not, these two are catching more light from behind, I think, and so they've got that beautiful glow. This guy has shadow, so half of this one is in shadow, the other half is really bright, which is beautiful, and then we've got that lovely deep purple pattern in the middle. So let's start on the top section there. I'm just going to pick up this darker purple to get the edges in there. So it kind of runs around. I've overlapped from the other petal a little bit because I just didn't want to have a gap between the two. So when you're doing things on top of things, you make sure you overlap a little bit so that you have that lovely continuous feeling or shape behind. And then this comes down just below that halfway grid line. I'm just going to fill in that darker purple there because it is definitely darker than the petal above it or behind it. Okay, so again, look at your black and white version and you'll see that that's a darker grey in there. So we need that to be darker than this one we've just finished up above. So I've got that in there. I'm just going to push that purple in now. I'm going to press pretty firmly because I want that to sort of be the base foundation colour. Probably too dark. but let's see, it's about the same tone. It's the same tone as the other shadow, this one we've just done. So we can kind of do the same process with that one. And it's a tad sort of lighter in here. There's actually a little bit of yellow or cream through there. I don't know if you can see that. It's like a yellowy cream colour. Anyway, I'm putting this lighter purple in just to give it a bit more tone. So it's coming out lighter from the centre and then darker as it gets out to the edges. Something like that. Might be a tad too dark, but bit. My next lightest purple. Okay. And then I'm going to just use, this is my lightest one that I'm using for the really brights, but I just want to put a little tiny bit of that in here. So when you want to have the same sort of light but not as bright, just press nice and light. So this is the lightest one I'm using. And then I'm going to push it in. So what will happen is it kind of dulls it down, keeps it not as light as it would be if it was a pure bright colour, but it just merges really well with that purple, I think, and creates a very nice combination of tones in there. Now see on the edge of that one, it's got a little trim. I mean, they all do, but that one looks a bit more obvious to me. Maybe because it's just in front of the lighter petal. I've just tried to tip my dust off, but it didn't all go away. There's this blue. I'm going to try the blue for a minute. Just see if I can get that to be a little darker, a bit more defined. Don't mind that. So that could work quite well. I just drew a sharper edge with the blue, just where I want it to kind of stand out in front of the other petal here. And then I'm just going to pull that in gently with the pad of my finger to sort of soften that off a little bit much. Just keep playing with that a little bit until I get the purples and the blues the right tone. So you can kind of just keep fiddling around with your colours until you get it where you want it to be. It's still a little too darkish, but it'll do for now. I just want to get that jagged edge in there. I'm trying to do that with my darker purple now because it's got such a lovely little soft ruffled edge on it, and I think that's important. And if we can get that to sort of stand out in front of the other petal behind, it just makes it a bit more interesting, and it also brings it forward, brings it closer to us. There we go. Okay, we've got a few little just slight wrinkles or shadows through there. See if I can get a couple of those to work, just with a darker tone, so on a slightly darker tone. I'm using this magenta colour because it's got that lovely darkness to it. It just creates a really nice little shadow. So even if you have a red or something like that, it might be quite nice. Just to give it a bit more depth and warmth and create that little fold, slight fold in there. And then you can find the light side too. So it's got a little light sort of shape coming through there like that. So I've just done that with my jacaranda pastel, and then just gently softly push that in very softly. You just start to create those subtle little shadows through there. And you can push them in and pull them around and soften them off a little bit. See how that's given that nice little, I've just put another bit of light here. And I'm going to push that in too because it's too bright at the moment. And light there. and then pushing them in just gently so they're sort of blurred off a little bit, but you've still got that distinct colour or tone. Cool. All right, now that's that bit done. So now we need to do the light section of this one. So this is one of the lightest parts, isn't it? If you again look at your black and white picture, you'll see that that's one of the brightest sections. So I'm going to use my lightest one, which is my lilac. This is my really pale lilac. Bring that round to there. And so if you've got a nice clean bit of paper and not much colour underneath it, then you'll get it really bright and rich and pure colour. Okay, and then when you blend this in, just make sure you've got a nice clean finger too, because I always make that mistake. I start to blend and put my dirty finger on there and muck it up. So try to have a clean finger. All right. So I've put all my light pastel on there. I might use a different finger so I don't contaminate it. And I want to keep that as light and bright as I can. Just gently blending that in, pushing that into the paper so it hangs onto it. And it doesn't matter if we can pull it in a little bit further and let that overlap onto what's going to be the dark purple stain. See how much that pops now against all those other colours because it's the lightest one. And then if we want to lighten it up more, we could pop a bit of white on there at the end just to get it nice and sharp. And then if you wanted to, I'm just going to show you, if you want to sharpen up the edges with that, this is white, but I could literally, with a pencil, you get a lot more control with a pencil to get those little edges going on. And white charcoal pencil is awesome because sometimes it's whiter than a pastel. So that's a nice way to get those little edges lovely and sharp. And there's not much difference between the white and that very pale lilac, but it's very subtle. Just kind of gives it a little glow. Lovely. Now remember that this is part of the same petal here. That one's just got shadow on it. So it's actually the one petal. Tip off my dust. Okay, now in this fella, we've got this big stain in the middle, right? So that sort of comes out from the center. I'm going to use this magenta, this dark magenta color to do that. And it kind of, again, it's got jagged edges on it as well. So you want to not have a smooth edge, but I'm just trying to kind of draw in the shape of that. Just do the edges of it and then I'll fill it in. Something like that. Okay. So that's kind of the shape of that. And there's also shadow in there. So if we fill in the rest of it, get your edges nice and sort of uneven. I know this isn't quite the right purple, but it's probably the best or the closest I've got. Okay, so I've got that in there. I'm going to push that in now. Through there. And a bit more in there. Okay. And that goes into the center, which is more of a kind of creamy, this color, I suppose. All of that color. So that kind of comes down through there. And I'm just looking at where that ends as it comes in towards the middle where the yellow is. So it comes kind of around like that. I'll stick the yellow in just so I know where that's got to be. It's got to live about there. Sometimes you've got to map these things out and just figure out where things have to go. So that's the yellow in there. And just a bit of that over that lighter violet, and that gives me that nice little glow. That's nice, just in there. Lovely. Okay. So now this stain, I'm just going back to the stain now that we've just done. It has a darker area and a lighter area. So if you can look at the picture, you can see that it's sort of got distinct darker spots and lighter spots. I'm just using this lighter violet over the top of it to find those lighter little sections. And especially through here, where there's a bit of a shadow. See that through there? A little bit up here. So it's really quite dark, isn't it, in there? I feel like it needs to be darker than what I've got it. Just going to softly push these in. If that's the case, let's see what this red violet does. Remember we had that beautiful dark red violet? So I reckon over the top of this magenta and purple, that might be a little bit stronger. Let's see. See if that's too dark. Not quite purple enough, is it? It needs to be a little bit more purple than that. It's getting a bit too muddy, a bit too dark and muddy. What'll happen if I put blue on? I love doing this. This is the fun bit. You just kind of experiment, try different things together. Because unlike other paint, you mix pastels on the paper. And so sometimes you get lovely surprises. Sometimes you get terrible shocks. Now that's working. Okay, nice. So a bit of blue, that's why we grabbed blue before. Over the top of the blue or red violet, so your darkest one, and then some of this blue over it, and it kind of just warms it right up, gives it some life. That's nice. I like it. Cool. Happy accidents. So there's a bit of dust on there, but I'll get rid of that in a sec. That's nice. All right, I'm going to tip that off. See how that's created a lovely feeling of tone and shadow. It's lovely. Nice, nice. All right, good. Okay. So just touch that up a tad more. Yeah. So I think sometimes it's boring to have exactly the right colour. It's a bit more fun to have to make it. Yeah, good. Oh, I love that. It's lovely and rich. Nice. Okay, so that's that one. And then we can move down into the next petal. So see how this is all coming together slowly but surely. It's all working out. We might have to get back into the other ones as we go, go back to where we began and touch things up a little bit, but we'll move around and carry on. So this bottom petal has actually got quite a kind of a yellowy, creamy colour. I'm just looking at the edges of it. So ignoring the big purple stain, if you look at the bottom of it, it's more yellow and cream than anything. So if I put some of this in here, so I'm trying not to go and get any more colours. I just want to see what I can do with the ones I've got here next to me. So this is my yellow. I'm smushing some of that around. I can see that through, and then I'm going to get my very light lilac-y colour and blend that through and see what we can make. This definitely has some of that beautiful creamy yellow through it. And while I'm there, I'm just going to touch up this one on the left as well, because actually it sits behind this one. So we probably need to get that one sorted out first. And it's also a really bright, light petal. So I'm just looking at where that goes to, the shape of that. So yeah, we better do this one here on the left first because it's underneath that other one. So I'm using my lightest little pale lilac, nearly white, and putting some of my little edges in there like that. But that one is really bright, so we need to make sure he stands out in front of this guy. If you look at your, again, the grey scale or black and white picture, you can see that this one's super bright. I'm just going to gently push that in with a dirty finger, which wasn't very clever. So then I can come forward and do the next petal in the front. Now there's also another little one that comes down under. I didn't see that one before. Here, just about there. The little one there must be connected to that one. So it pops down there at the base of that. And it's got this lovely little fold underneath. So what I'm going to do is try and make that happen with a darker purple. So using my brightest light on there. Ah, gorgeous. And then using, I might try this purple. See how the end of that little one there just folds away underneath? So it's got a slight shadow just on the edge there. So if I use this purple, which is kind of my mid purple on there, purple's beautiful for shadow. And now I'm very softly just going to dab it in with my finger. And that kind of sinks it behind, just to block the dust. See how that makes it look like it's folding away under there? And I just have to sort out the edge of that just very carefully. It's hard to do the fiddly bits with the edges of your pastels, but with practice you'll get better at it. There we go. So that's nice. That's got a little fold under there. Lovely. And it's also a little darker on the side, just down here. Very slight. Just on the left of that little petal there, there's a little tiny shadow. So I've just used my purple again and not much of it, and then just kind of dab it so that it's not a really strong line. And you can see I've gone outside the lines. I've got stuff in my green here now. So I'm going to have to come around here and just clean up with the green to sharpen up that edge a little bit. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Good. Okay, so that's those ones done. And that'll do that bit for now. So we'll come back into this guy. So remember we were putting some yellow in, and then I'm putting in this pale violet, which is the lightest one I've been using. Now it's also got a lovely little shadow just there. What colour would that be, I wonder? And we've got the light section down through here. So it's like a triangle of light there on this petal. You can see that. And then there's shadow, and then there's another triangle, looks like that. The edges of this petal are purple, so we'll have to put some purple in there in a minute. Okay, so that shadow, this shadow here, there's a little shadow across here. So I'm just going to pop it in with purple at the moment. It's my mid purple, so it's not my darkest one. But I need it to be the same tone. If you look at your black and white again, you'll see it's the same tone as the shadow on the petal above. So even though the colour's slightly different, it's the same tone. Okay, so I'm just going to gently push that in. So it's still got some of that yellowy tinge underneath because I put that down first, and then a bit of the purple over the top. So it's creating a nice little shadow there. It's amazing how much detail you start to find in things as you move around. Okay, I'm going to pop a bit more yellow through there. So yellow and purple are complementary. They always look beautiful together. But when you rub them together, they make these gorgeous greys. You get these lovely, lovely grey kinds of tones, and they're just glorious. Okay. So that's dry there. And then we've got more shadows down in here. So what we need to do is finish off or get these edges sorted out. So pushing in all this cream and yellow. Like that, so that we're getting those beautiful yellowy tones through there. Putting a bit more of this lovely light in there. I'm really liking the very light violet. It's quite gorgeous. So this petal sort of folds away as well, and it's got a few shadows on it too. So over on this left side, you can see that that's sort of in shadow here, and it's sitting on top of these two little ones we did before. Okay, so that comes down through there. And I'm going to pop a bit of this purple in here just to get some tone or shadow in there. And then we have shadow down through there. So you can see that on this bottom section there's a little shadow there. And then there's another shadow there. So the shadows and the light are what makes things dramatic, you know, it just creates interest. You could potentially leave your mark loose like this and not blend anything in. That's the other awesome thing about pastels, is you have so much potential with, you know, how you use them. I like to blend a lot, probably a bit too much. But pushing that in just creates this lovely feeling of shadow and tone. We'll do the edges of this petal in a sec. See how that's created this lovely dramatic shadow. Nice. I want to get that feeling on the others now. Now that I've done that, I feel like, oh, this one needs a bit more yellow in there. So this is what happens. You kind of work your way around and think, should have done that back there. That worked nicely. And you can just sort of go back in and, you know, fiddle around, because you've got so much ability to layer everything. So now I can come in here and I can whiten or lighten up in a couple of spots just to get that really beautiful contrast of light and dark. We're going to go over time today, ladies. Sorry. Just can't help myself. Okay. Bit light through there. And then around the edges, got these gorgeous purpley coloured frills going on. So what you need to do is find the edge of your pastel. A bit hard on a little tiny short bit like this, but I'm going to have a crack at it. And just get the purple around in the edges like this. I'm just doing little loose marks. I'm not doing a hard line, just sort of little squiggly marks around the edge. And it kind of comes up through there. And around the bottom here. So just getting all those really beautiful purpley colours in there. I know I should have left a gap on that bottom of that petal there. Kind of missed that bit, never mind. So now I've got that purple on there. I'm going to add a little bit of this magenta as well, just in a couple of spots because it's nice. Like that. And then with a reasonably clean finger. What I want to do is get the pad of your finger and you want to kind of just put it down on the edge and pull it in towards the petal. So we're trying to soften off that edge. See how that's getting lovely and soft across there like that. Just pulling it in gently, gently. You can see where I had dirty fingers. It's kind of gone all messy around there. Ooh, I like this petal best. That's my favourite one. You always end up with a favourite one, and then you can't quite get the others to do the same thing. Okay, so just sharpen up this edge a bit more with my purple. So you've got to kind of keep going over things and tidying up a little bit. Ooh, I like what that's doing. So I'm going to tip off some dust. And you know why I like it? It's because it's got the shadow and the light on it. It's quite lovely. Yeah. All right, and then we need to do the stain in the middle. So we've got this, it's almost in two parts, this one. It's got two kind of halves. So this one comes down through here and sort of there. And then that one comes down through there. So just filling all of that in with that beautiful magenta colour. And then I can darken some of it off with my blue again, like we did in the last one. It's a tricky bit. You've got to remember what you did. So I used the magenta and then I used the red violet. So that's the darkest to get some of that beautiful depth into it. And then some of the blue over the top. Lovely, lovely. Okay. Nice, isn't it? Tipping off dust. Okay. Yes. Good. Now I want to do some of these. I can't help myself. I want to get back up into here and just get a bit more depth happening on the edges of these. And even though that might not actually be on the picture, it's kind of fun to just, add your own little touches. Nice. All right, let's get the next bit in. So I'm just going to grab a little pencil to draw in the edges of the next section. You can't really see that on there. But I just want to make sure I get the shapes in the right spot for that one. And then up through there. Okay. So that little petal right there is similar to this sky. We have some sort of shadow on this side here. So if we put some darker purple on this side, and then we've got our little stain that comes out from there as well. So darker purple up here. And then there's also some really lovely yellow going on down through here. Through there. And then the lighter one over that. So remember we made that kind of more creamy by putting that your light colour over the top, whether that be a white or a cream or a very pale lilac. I've got the pale lilac. And then I'm just going to kind of pull it around down through there, sort of merge them together a little bit. And then we're going to touch up the edges because the edges have this sort of darker tone around them just to define that against what's behind it. And then we can do the stain. Okay, so soft little edge with this darker one, which is really lovely. And make sure you give it a little wiggly edge. It's not a sharp, hard line. It's just got this lovely, soft, gentle edge. And then what we want to do is, again, you just want to get the pad of your finger and very gently, if you can. It's hard to see over your hand sometimes. Very gently pushing through there to get that edge. And then we want to put the stain in. So the stain takes up quite a bit of space with your dark purple, this beautiful magenta. So same process as the other one. We want to put this one down first. And again, I can see some shadow in that one. So it's kind of lighter towards the base there. Filling all of that in with the stain. See, she's coming together beautifully now. And then your blue violet or your red violet underneath or in to make that extra dark. So that's darker purple. It's right in the middle there. It's got a little shadowy kind of shape that comes out through here. And it goes up darker almost there. Got a lot of dust on my page, which is so distracting sometimes. And then I'm going to get my blue, put a bit of blue in there. The blue's nice. And that all looks pretty good. Pretty good. Happy with that one. Okay, and then I'll tip off my dust again. There we go. So we're just about there. What I want to do is just sharpen up the edge of this little fella. This one we've just done around here. Just got these soft little purpley sort of edges on it. Just darken that up a tiny bit through there to create that shadow effect or the feeling of the shadow. Now you can see where I've tipped off my dust, it kind of catches on the paper sometimes. So in this area here, I've tipped off all my dust, but it's caught. So that's no longer as bright as I had it, which is a pain in the neck. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is tip off that last lot of dust. First, I might just touch up this a little bit more and pop some more yellow in here for a bit more power. So when you want a stronger color, usually if you press hard, you get a nice, rich, strong, bright color. So I just pressed a little bit harder then, and the color's sticking well to the paper. Again, that'll depend on the kinds of pastel you've got. The other thing I've just seen is this little funny green thingy here. Needs to come around and dip around through there. So I'm just going to pop that in. This is a different green, picked up the wrong one. So carry on that through there, and it comes across through there like that. Is there green anywhere else? It's sort of greenish in here a little bit. I'll smush a bit of that in the middle. And then of course we've got our stem. So I'm going to pop that in here. Now I've just used the lighter green, so that's got to be now the lighter side of my stem. You can see the stem also has a lighter and a darker side because of the direction of the light. So I'm just going to pop in the darker green on the right hand side just to, can't really see it against the background. Is it lighter? It is lighter than the background. So that's okay. I can use this mid green, which I've just called lighter green. Use that, and then to lighten up the side of it, try a bit of yellow. See if that works. And if not, then I can pop a bit of the lilac or the white over it. Yeah, that's bright enough. Lovely, lovely. You could potentially lighten that up even more, like this. And then maybe run your finger or a blender just down there to soften off those edges a little bit, tipping off dust. So the other thing that's happening when I tip off the dust is it's catching on all the background here. Now, I'm not that concerned about it, but if you had a light background and dark colours were falling on there, it's a bit annoying. So you'd be able to either push it all in again, so I could literally just do this and blend it all in and make it part of the background. Or if it's clean paper, you can remove it with your eraser. Just want to dab it, don't rub it, and that'll help to get it off. So this area here needs to be brightened up again because it's got all the dust sitting on it. So now's the time to sort of reevaluate everything, have another look, check it all out, freshen it up where you might need to add light. See how that brightens that right up because it's got all the dust sitting on top. I can brighten this one up too. Just see that it's amazing the difference when you put it over the dust, how much that affects the tone. So I can just literally patch that back on there. Get all those beautiful lights, bright bits back in there. This is what creates the drama and the interest. All the brights. Gorgeous. And it should be a bit brighter in here too. So this is the fun part when you get to run around it with all your lights and really make it pop. Pop and pop. Beautiful. And there's, I reckon, anyway, there's a little bit of light just here on this edge. So I'm just going to put a little bit of, just a couple of little broken lines on the edge there. And that catches the light on the edge of that petal. It's quite lovely. And maybe I could put a little bit of light just up here on this one too. When you do that on the edges, don't do a full hard line, just do little broken lines and that'll keep it nice and soft. I think that was a bit much there. I'll dab it in and soften it off. So gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And then I can tip off my dust. And when I do that, I'm going to end up with light dust here because it's going to go that way. And then I'll have to either sort the background out. Yeah, push it in, I think. I'm going to call that one finished for today. Just tip it off. I hope you've enjoyed doing this class. I have, actually. It's been fun. Flowers are great. And I know I always start off thinking, oh gosh, I don't know how this is going to go. But then by the time you get to the end of it, it's good because you get into a bit of a rhythm with your colours and so forth and textures and things. So could potentially do a bit more on that and, you know, brighten it up a bit more or get some more depth even. And you could change the background if you wanted to, or leave it plain, whatever you like. But yep, I'm going to call that one done. So make sure you pop your name on it. A charcoal pencil or a pastel pencil is the best option. And once you've signed it, take a photo and send it to me, and then we can pop it in the newsletter. It's always fun to see everyone else's art, I think. It's nice. Everyone likes to see how everyone else went. It's good for people who don't know what we do to see the kinds of artwork that we do. And it feels nice, doesn't it, when you see your art up in lights, so to speak. All right. So that's the end of today's class. As I said, I hope you've had a great time and I would love to see your photos. And if you have any questions or feedback or comments, then let me know. And thanks for coming. Bye for now.